He stayed silent for 5 years. Never confessed. No one believed him, not his friends, not his family, not even the law. When he walked out of prison, all he had left were headlines that destroyed his name and a world frozen in time. But that day, a little girl's scream in the snow changed everything. Now, he's not just fighting to clear his name, he's racing to uncover the truth. Outside, the snow was falling silently. The whiteness covered the streets. Footprints quickly disappeared, and everything seemed to be renewing itself, as if trying to cover up the past. When Mark stepped into his freedom years later, he didn't find a welcome committee or a warm embrace waiting for him. Just cold. And in that cold, a man left alone with himself. After leaving behind all that he had behind the prison gates, there was only one thing he carried: the shadow of an accusation, a crime he still didn't completely understand. Mark used to work in banking, a highly skilled and trusted financial advisor. His clients loved him, and his bosses trusted him. That was until one morning, without any warning, he was arrested in his office. The accusation against him was large-scale fraud. It was claimed that millions of dollars had disappeared from the bank vault. But Mark had never seen the documents or the evidence. He didn't remember ever signing anything because nothing had been shown to him. The charges hung in the air, but the punishment seemed already decided. The trial was short. Without considering his defense, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison due to the serious allegations in the case file. His family turned their backs on him, especially his father. Mark's father was a former soldier. He had devoted his life to rules and discipline. Seeing his son's name in the newspapers, especially attached to such a scandal, was a huge embarrassment for him. From that day on, he never called, wrote a letter, or even came to court. Mark's wife left him even faster. After the first headline appeared in the paper, she filed for divorce and left their home. In those days, being alone was not a choice, but a necessity. And for Mark, loneliness was thicker than the prison walls. His days in prison were even darker than he had expected. The other inmates believed he had made a huge score and hidden the money. He was constantly under pressure, beaten, threatened, and asked over and over, "Where did you hide the money?" But he couldn't answer, because he truly had no idea. He endured. He gritted his teeth. He stayed strong. And now, with the snow crunching under his feet, he was trying to move away from the past. He had only one piece of paper, his old friend Liam's phone number. They had been close before the prison. They had started at the same office, built their careers together. Mark hoped, deep down, that Liam still believed in him. He walked into an old phone booth he found on the street, covered in snow. His shaking fingers dialed the number. The voice on the other side was familiar. "Hello," Liam said, hesitantly. "It's me, Mark," the man said, his words choking in his throat. There was silence. Then Liam spoke. "You surprised me. But come on, let's talk." When Mark left the booth, there was a tiny spark of hope in his heart. The bar where Liam worked was far away, but he was determined to walk. As the snowflakes hit his face, the silence of the years seemed to break. When he reached the river, the sound of the flowing water brought a sense of peace. The quietly flowing water filled his eyes, as if to empty himself. Then, something caught his attention. In the yard of a small bungalow, he saw children running around happily. The family was having a barbecue, and the kids were laughing and playing in the snow. At that moment, a memory from the past flooded Mark's mind. The peaceful family life he had dreamed of with his ex-wife. The weekends they had planned to spend together, the sound of children, the smells of food in a warm garden. But all of it had been buried under the ashes of the past. Mark lowered his head and continued walking. As he passed the next bungalow, he suddenly heard the sound of children laughing, echoing through the silence. But this time, something was different. The children were too close to the river. Instinctively, he quickened his pace. "Kids, don't go there," he shouted. But they didn't hear him. They kept chasing each other, laughing. Then, the little girl slipped and fell into the river. Without thinking, Mark jumped into the water. The cold water hit his body like a knife. His breath was taken away, and his heart started to race. But in that moment, he didn't care about the cold or the current. When he looked into the river, the only thing he saw was the silhouette of a small body struggling. The little girl was flailing in panic, the current pulling her away from the shore. Mark reached out as far as he could with all his strength, swimming against the powerful current to get closer and grab her. Finally, he was able to grab the hem of her jacket. He held on tight. But the river didn't want to let go of either of them. Mark reached for a nearby tree branch to stabilize himself. The girl's screams mixed with the water, her voice almost drowned out. He gently lifted her into his arms and slowly moved toward the shore. Each step was a battle, every breath a struggle. But he had done it. When he brought her to the shore, his arms were numb, his lips were turning blue. But the girl was still alive. She was in shock, trembling, but she was breathing. Mark held her tightly and whispered, "It's okay. You're safe." But the fear inside him hadn't faded. Because the child wasn't alone. There had been 2 kids running toward the river, but only one had made it to the shore. "Where's the other child?" he panicked, looking around. "Where's your brother?" he asked the little girl, but she didn't answer. Mark began shouting, "Help! There's another child! Help!" Voices came from the yard. 2 women rushed outside, opening the door. Fear was on their faces, exhaustion and panic in their eyes. When one of the women saw the child in Mark's arms, she screamed, "Emma!" and ran forward. When the little girl threw herself into her mother's arms, Mark took a deep breath. At least one was safe. But the other child was still missing. The other woman turned to Mark, her voice trembling. "Where's Noah? Where's my son?" Mark took a step back. "I could only see Emma. I was in the water, but when I came out, the other child wasn't there." Those words brought tears to the women's eyes. They immediately split up, running in different directions to search for the child. Mark turned back to the riverbank and screamed his name. "Noah! Noah!" Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. A sound came from behind the bushes. A child crying. Mark immediately ran toward it, picked up the child, and shouted, "I found him. He's here." Noah was scared but safe. The woman dropped to her knees the moment she saw her son, unable to hold back her tears. When everyone returned to the house, there was chaos, but also a deep sense of gratitude. Emma's jacket had been removed, she was covered with a blanket, and the heater was turned on. Mark, still wet and cold, stood there, motionless. One of the women handed him a blanket. "God, the water was freezing. You must be frozen," she said. Mark shook his head and could only manage a quiet, "It's okay." Because, really, it didn't matter. What mattered at that moment was that the children were alive. One of the women extended her hand. "I'm Harper," she said. The other nodded. "I'm Olivia, Emma's mom. You also found my son Noah." Mark gave a small smile. "I'm Mark. I really just happened to be passing by. And you? Just needed help." Harper squinted and looked at him carefully. "You don't look like someone who lives around here. Did you walk here?" Mark lowered his head. He didn't know what to say. Yeah, it was just a walk. But his eyes whispered the truths he couldn't say. Harper took a deep breath. "It's clear you're running from something." Olivia interrupted. "But no matter what, you saved our lives today. We owe you a thank you." Mark swallowed all the bitterness and pain he had built up inside up until that moment. "I just did what had to be done." Harper, after looking at him carefully, said, "You're freezing. Come on, let's get you something dry," and invited him inside. Olivia brought a hoodie and sweatpants. Mark took the clothes and went to the small bathroom. When he looked at himself in the mirror, the tired face staring back was familiar yet strangely foreign. Water dripped from his wet hair, soaking the floor, and he stood frozen in front of that mirror. Today, he had felt a sense of humanity he hadn't experienced in years. The little girl's scream had stirred his conscience. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward change. When he returned to the living room, everyone seemed a little calmer. Harper handed him a cup of coffee. "Here, this will warm you up." Mark thanked her. "I don't really want to stay much longer. I don't want to be a bother." Harper shook her head. "You saved our lives. What's it mean to be a bother?" Mark smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd had in a while. Maybe this little wooden house wasn't just a shelter for him, but a sign to start over. But the past wasn't easy to erase, and Mark's past had already begun to follow him. When Mark left Harper and Olivia's house, the sky was still shaded in tones of gray, and the snow continued to fall slowly but steadily. The dry clothes he wore were Harper's, several sizes too big but warm. With every step, he could feel the snow sticking to his cuffs, and it reminded him that he was still alive. There was a complex feeling inside him. On one hand, the peace of saving those children, and on the other, the dark past still clinging to his back. He had no place in this city. At least, that's how it felt. There was only one place left to go, Liam's bar. After hours of walking, he reached the bar. The lights on the sign were dimly glowing, and music could be heard from inside. When he opened the door, a wave of warm air rushed out. It wasn't crowded inside, but it was lively. Liam was sitting on a stool in the corner of the bar, and his eyes immediately locked onto Mark, who had just appeared at the door. There was a brief moment of silence. Then, Liam got up, walked quickly toward him, and unexpectedly pulled Mark into a hug. "Meant seeing you like this. Seeing you again," he said, his voice choking. Mark struggled to respond. "It's been years," he muttered. Liam shook his head. "Too long, but I'm sorry for everything we missed." Then, he gestured toward the bar. "Sit down. I've already ordered food for you. You must be starving." Mark nodded and sat down. The warmth inside was a contrast to the snow outside, but his mind was still cold. Liam called out to the kitchen, then popped open 2 beers. Surrounded by the familiar smells of the bar, Mark focused on the meal in front of him. His stomach growled in gratitude as he hadn't eaten properly for days. Just as he was about to take another bite, the sound of the television echoed from the walls of the bar. The news had started. Mark's spoon froze in the air. The voice of the news anchor was familiar, but the content made him feel ice cold. Famous financial expert and fraud suspect Mark Walker was released today. Having completed his sentence, Walker is still considered responsible for a multi-million-dollar scam. Victims are still waiting to get their money back. An old photo of Mark appeared on the screen. He was dressed in a tie, his expression serious. But that man was gone. In his place was someone tired, broken, but still standing strong. Mark's hand trembled. "I didn't do it," he said in a hushed voice. "I didn't do this." But in the bar, only the sound of the television echoed. Wanting to break the uncomfortable silence, Liam raised his beer. "Forget it, you're here now. Relax. I even set up a bed for you." Mark looked up in surprise. "A bed?" Liam smiled. "I took the upstairs of the bar. I'm staying here now. I have a partner. I set up a room for you. You can stay here for a while." This offer sparked a glimmer of hope in Mark for old friendship. His eyes filled with tears. "For you to do this? After everything," he started to say, but the words got stuck in his throat. Liam gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Just get it together. Everything will pass." That night, Mark lay on the bed in the room Liam had shown him. For the first time in months, he laid his head on a pillow. Before falling asleep, he plugged in his phone. That phone had been off for 5 years. Now it was on. The screen's light hit his eyes, and a strange unease filled him. Notifications, old messages, missed calls. But all of them belonged to the past. He took a deep breath, turned off the screen, and closed his eyes. By morning, there was a strange weight in his chest. The snow had stopped outside, but inside, a storm was beginning. When he came downstairs, he heard Liam on the phone in the back room. The door was slightly open. He was about to walk by when the words he heard froze him in place. "Yeah, I'm here. I'm about to earn their trust. As soon as I find out where the money is, I'll call you. Of course, everything is going according to plan." Mark's heart froze. His vision darkened, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. In that instant, he felt perhaps the greatest betrayal since leaving prison. Liam, the one who trusted him, hugged him, welcomed him, had never truly been his friend. He had brought him in to find out the location of the so-called missing money. Now, everything was clear. Liam's smile, the food he had offered, the bed he had shown. They were all traps. Even the warm blanket on his back was part of a cold reckoning. At that moment, his phone in his pocket vibrated. The screen showed an unknown number. Mark hesitated for a moment. He answered. "Hello? Is this Mark?" The voice was familiar. It was a woman's voice. "It's Harper. I recognized you from the TV. I found your number. I want to talk to you." Mark didn't know what to think. His mind was a mess. Harper? What did she want? But something kept him from hanging up. Maybe it was a last hope. Maybe some intuitive connection. "Okay," he said. Harper gave him an address. Mark pulled his hoodie over his head and quietly left the bar, without saying a word to Liam. But everything was about to change. Mark's thoughts were complicated. Could this be a trap? Was Harper really trying to help? Or was she just like everyone else, looking for her own gain? But for the first time, his instincts told him the opposite. Maybe Harper was really someone looking for light in that dark story. "Yes," he said finally, "I need your help. Because I'm innocent." Harper nodded. "We'll prove it." She pulled out a file from the table. "I've looked over the documents that are supposed to be yours. The signatures, the content, everything is too cleanly done. Too clean, In fact, and that tells me this, professionals have worked on fake documents. Teams that make these kinds of plans usually don't work alone. It requires an organization. Mark took a deep breath. I've never seen those documents. I only found out that my name was being used while I was inside. Everyone thought the money was with me, but I really didn't take anything. Everything just got dumped on me. Harper narrowed her eyes and took notes. Who were the managers at the bank you worked at during that time? If we're going to open the file, I need to get to their connections as well. Mark listed the names one by one. One name, in particular, stood out: David Kramer, a senior executive. Harper suddenly stopped. This name sounds familiar. It came up in another case a few years ago. Then her eyes widened. Wait, there was a client named Alexander Rothman, a wealthy media tycoon. He was also Kramer's client, and it was said that he transferred large sums of money to foreign accounts. But that case was closed. Mark's eyes lit up. I remember him. He was a very special client for our branch. Everyone had to deal with him, but I never handled any direct transactions with him. Harper stood up. Mark, then this case might be connected to those clients, maybe even a much larger operation. This isn't just a setup involving you. I'm asking you for something. Work with me on this. I have a discreet apartment. Stay there. I need to investigate this quietly. We'll go step by step. Mark nodded. He had no choice but to trust her. Harper wasn't just offering legal help, but extending a hand for him to start over. Maybe this was the exit door he had been searching for in the darkness for years. Silently, he got up, grabbed his jacket, and followed Harper. That night, they went to Harper's hidden apartment. When Mark stepped inside, his eyes widened. It was modern, secure, and yet simply furnished. Every detail inside was carefully chosen. This wasn't just a shelter, it was a new beginning. As Mark looked out the window, the only thought running through his mind was, I'm on the right path this time. This time, I'm not alone. But outside, there were still eyes watching him. And chasing the truth wouldn't just prove his innocence. It would risk his life once again. The days spent in Harper's secret apartment had become both a refuge and an interrogation room for Mark. While the outside world still saw him as guilty, inside this apartment, for the first time, someone was truly trying to understand him. He still had nightmares at night, with echoes of the screams and false accusations from his past, but waking up to the documents Harper brought in the morning gave him a reason to fight. He no longer just wanted to survive, he wanted to uncover the truth. And maybe, finally be forgiven. Harper was diving deeper every day. She meticulously went through Mark's old bank records, the documents signed at the time, and the internal audit reports, searching for any small inconsistency. And finally, she found something. A small but critical detail in a contract. A date that coincided with the day Mark was in prison. The signature on this document looked like Mark's, but there was no way he could have signed it that day. Look, Harper said, spreading the documents out on the table. This could be our turning point. If we can technically prove that this signature isn't yours, we can show that someone inside the system deliberately placed it there. That would collapse the entire case. For the first time, real hope spread across Mark's face. Can we do this? He asked quietly. Harper winked. I've been exposing lies for years. This is the most complicated case I've ever had. But since I met you, I've felt at ease. We'll make this happen together. That same day, Harper called in a forensic document expert. The documents were examined one by one. The direction of the signature, the pressure, the pen type, and in the end, the expert confirmed Harper's instincts. This signature wasn't made by Mark. Someone mimicked his style, but not exactly. It's clearly forged. With this report, Harper brought in another high-level cybersecurity expert to speed up the process. Because now, the issue wasn't just a signature, it had turned into a systematic digital fabrication. Bank messages, transfer logs, password changes. Everything began to be examined. As the investigation deepened, Harper started focusing on one name, Alexander Rothman. Rothman appeared to be a successful, philanthropic businessman from the outside. Media investments, art projects, tech funds. But behind the scenes, he wasn't as clean. Harper remembered a case that had been filed against him in the past. The case had been covered up, documents were missing, and witnesses silenced. But now, Rothman's name was appearing in Mark's case as well, and this wasn't a coincidence. That night, Harper showed Mark all the files. I think the person who set you up isn't directly Rothman, but someone working with his money. Mark looked at the name on the screen. David Kramer, he said slowly. He kept pressuring us back then. He kept saying to prioritize high-end clients. He never let us ask questions about Rothman. Harper's face grew serious. David is currently a consultant for another bank. But the interesting thing is, one of Rothman's companies is active in that bank's investment division, so the connection is still there. Maybe Rothman didn't directly frame you, but there was a structure working on his behalf. And you were an easily expendable figure in this system. Mark took a deep breath. So I was just an unlucky victim? Harper nodded. Yes, because you were someone who appeared to have no issues in your past, quiet, reliable on the surface. If someone needed to be blamed, they needed someone who wouldn't be questioned. That's why they picked you. That night, neither of them could sleep. They now had a target, but this target was someone powerful, very rich, and well-connected. Harper knew the gaps in the system, but to fight someone like Rothman, they needed more evidence and time. Mark still risked being recognized on the street. The news on TV still echoed. Mark Walker was released, but the whereabouts of the money are still unknown. By morning, Mark made a decision. I don't want to hide. If we're going to fight, it has to be behind my name. I lived this, I was ruined. Now, I have to make it right. Harper turned to him. Then we need to completely clear your name. If the media targets you again, this whole process will collapse. That day, for the first time, Mark and Harper went out together. A secret meeting was arranged with a journalist Harper had connections with. The goal was for Mark to break his silence. There wouldn't be a full interview, just to start by showing the documents and forged papers. The evidence they had was already starting to grab the right people's attention, and it was creating discomfort on Rothman and Kramer's side. But that night, an anonymous message sent to Harper's phone turned everything upside down. If you dig any further, it won't just be you, your daughter will pay the price. Don't. When Mark saw the message, his eyes widened. This threat, they know about Emma too. But Harper didn't even flinch. This is just the beginning. But we're not afraid. Because you're not alone anymore, Mark. And I didn't spend my life just defending the powerful. I won't stop until I expose the truth. After the anonymous threat message, the silence inside the apartment was as intense and cold as the snow blanket outside. Harper's face was tense, yet determined. She was still holding her phone. She hadn't deleted the message. She turned off the screen without blinking, took a deep breath, and looked at Mark. If they've become desperate enough to do this, it means we're on the right track. Mark's heart froze. The mention of Emma's name in the threat message triggered the anger he had been holding inside for so long. The injustices he had faced, the false accusations, the loneliness, he had swallowed it all. But now it wasn't just about him. An innocent child had been threatened, and that crossed a line. The next morning, Harper sprang into action. She contacted trusted individuals from media, security, and legal circles. The evidence they had was powerful: forged documents, forensic signature analysis, solutions to internal bank communications, and traces of secret transfers to external accounts funded by Rothman. All these materials were being prepared for submission to a high-level court. When Harper finished the file, she made sure to add one more thing. This is not just Mark's case, but also a case about how the system can create a criminal with blind justice. That day, for the first time, Mark faced the outside world. After all the days he had spent hiding, scared, not even wanting to speak his name, he stepped into the courthouse with Harper, and flashbulbs exploded in front of him. Cameras, reporters, microphones, they were all there. But this time, he didn't stay silent. He straightened his shoulders, tightly held the file Harper had given him, and spoke one sentence to the press. I'm here not just to defend myself, but to defend the truth. The trial was tough. Rothman's lawyers were powerful, and Kramer had changed his statement several times before appearing in court. But the documents, timelines, internal contradictions, and expert opinions made everything clear. And finally, after 3 weeks of intense proceedings, the day of the verdict arrived. The judge's voice was clear and firm. Mark Walker is acquitted of all charges. Our court has determined that he was the victim of a conspiracy created with forged evidence. Legal action will be initiated against the relevant parties. In that moment, the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Mark closed his eyes. The sentence that had been echoing in his mind for 5 years had finally become reality. I didn't do it. It was no longer just an inner voice. It was now an official decision. As they left the courthouse, Mark made eye contact with Harper. There were no tears in her eyes, but there was a smile at the corner of her lips. It was a silent but magnificent victory. When they stepped outside, the press turned to them once again. This time, Harper spoke. Today, it's not just one man who has been cleared. The blind spots of the system have also been revealed. This story is a fight for justice, and we won. After the press conference, Mark suddenly saw a familiar face in the crowd, his father. The man who hadn't come to court years ago, who hadn't even supported him with a letter, was now there. He was older, his eyes red, his hands in his pockets. Mark slowly walked over to him. "Dad," he said, in a simple tone. The man lowered his head. "I didn't believe you. I never even tried. And that is unforgivable." Mark quietly replied, "True. But you're here anyway." The man raised his eyes. "And if you let me, I want to spend the rest of my life making up for this." Mark didn't say anything, but when he leaned his broken shoulder against his father's, the answer was clear enough. A little further ahead, waiting for him, was Harper, who had silently but bravely stood by his side throughout this entire journey. Harper wasn't just a lawyer. She had become the turning point in his life. Mark walked up to her, held her hand. "You saved my life," he said. Harper shook her head. "You saved your life. I just believed in you." Weeks passed. With the compensation Mark received, the media's attention turned to him. But he wasn't after showmanship. He started working at a small investment firm, out of sight, quiet, honest, and reborn. Harper, too, built a new life with him. The bond between them, shaped over time, had now turned into love. As Mark turned his back on the past, one thing was certain. Sometimes life pushes you to the very bottom of the dark, just so you can find the light within yourself. And this time, that light would never go out. If this story has touched you, if you believe that justice, even if it takes time, will always find its way, and if you feel that true trust is earned quietly, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video, because every story could be someone else's hope. And maybe one day, your story will be told here too.